Hello, and welcome back to the podcast that lets you relive the past, 1 year at a time. Today, we're dialing back to 1946. This is old news. World War II had ended just months earlier, leaving the world reeling from its devastation. In 1946, reconstruction began in earnest. Europe lay in ruins, millions of refugees were on the move, and entire economies had collapsed. Amid this chaos, a new hope emerged. The United Nations. It was founded in October 1945, with delegates from 50 countries gathering in San Francisco to sign the UN Charter. Then in January 1946, the nations gathered in London for the first General Assembly. Its mission was clear: to promote peace, security, human rights, cooperation among nations, and to prevent another global conflict. The UN Security Council also met for the first time, establishing the framework for global peacekeeping, while UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, began its work to promote education and cultural cooperation worldwide. But while nations gathered to talk peace, the shadow of war still loomed large in Europe, and justice was being served in Germany. The Nuremberg trials, which began in late 1945 and continued through 1946, prosecuted 24 top Nazi leaders for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Judges from the US, UK, Soviet Union, and France presided over the proceedings, setting a precedent for global accountability. Defendants included Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and Albert Speer. Evidence ranged from thousands of documents to survivor testimonies and film footage, exposing the full scope of Nazi atrocities. 12 were sentenced to death, 7 received prison terms, and 3 were acquitted. The trials also declared organizations like the SS and Gestapo criminal entities. Nuremberg established a principle that would echo through history. Individuals, not just states, could be held accountable for crimes against humanity. It laid the foundation for future international courts and human rights law, including the Geneva Conventions and the International Criminal Court. Across the Atlantic was the start of the American baby boom, marking a profound demographic shift driven by post-war relief, economic confidence, and the return of over 12 million servicemen. The catalyst was the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, universally known as the GI Bill. This landmark legislation provided veterans with unprecedented financial security through the Veterans Administration 5A, offering low-cost, government-backed home loans and tuition assistance. By de-risking the future, the GI Bill gave young couples the means to move into newly developed suburbs and confidently embark on raising large families. This influx caused the annual birth rate to surge dramatically, soaring past 3.4 million births and signaling a national pivot from wartime anxiety to domestic growth centered on the nuclear family. The sheer number of children instantly became the focus of a new, optimistic consumer culture, leading to massive demand for housing, schools, and services, and driving prosperity in construction and manufacturing. Sociologically, it reinforced a conservative shift toward traditional gender roles as the size of the nuclear family became the cultural ideal. Yet this domestic optimism was tempered by intense post-war challenges. The return to peacetime wasn't seamless. Labor unrest swept the nation as workers demanded better pay, triggering massive strikes across the steel, coal, railroad, and auto industries. President Harry S. Truman wrestled with severe consumer inflation and acute housing shortages. To stabilize the chaotic economy, the administration pushed for the Employment Act of 1946, a pivotal law that committed the federal government to promoting maximum employment and economic stability, clearly defining America's new, proactive approach to managing the peacetime economy. Cold War tensions were also taking shape. In March, Winston Churchill delivered his famous Iron Curtain speech at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, at Truman's invitation, warning of Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe. The phrase crystallized the emerging divide between Communist East and Capitalist West. Later that summer, the U.S. created the Atomic Energy Commission, replacing wartime military control with civilian oversight of nuclear research and power, marking the dawn of the nuclear age. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union tightened its grip on Eastern Europe, installing communist governments in Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. In Greece, civil war erupted, which pitted the British-backed royalist Greek government against the communist-led Democratic Army of Greece. The conflict stemmed from the vacuum left after the Nazi occupation, with the communist resistance seeking control. When Britain, unable to sustain support, withdrew, the U.S. intervened with the Truman Doctrine in 1947, providing massive aid and helped the government defeat the communists in 1949, aided by the closure of the Yugoslav border following the Tito-Stalin split. This guaranteed Greece remained in the Western sphere. The map was also changing in Asia. The Philippines gained independence from the United States, becoming the first Southeast Asian nation to break free from colonial rule after World War II, a turning point signaling the decline of Western imperial dominance. The Philippine Islands had been a territory of the U.S. since the Spanish-American War in 1898, but were occupied by Japan from 1942 to 45 during the war. Then the Treaty of Manila was signed on July 4, 1946, and established the Third Philippine Republic, as planned since the Tidings-McDuffie Act of 1934, which promised their independence after a 10-year transition period. But following the war, Japan remained under U.S. occupation, beginning a sweeping reconstruction under General Douglas MacArthur, including a new democratic constitution that would transform its economy and society. By November, political winds shifted at home in the U.S. as Republicans won control of Congress for the first time since 1928, setting up battles that would define Truman's presidency and influence domestic and foreign policy in the early Cold War era. In innovation, ENIAC, the world's first general-purpose electronic computer, was unveiled at the University of Pennsylvania. Weighing 30 tons, packed with 18,000 vacuum tubes, and consuming enormous electricity, ENIAC could perform thousands of calculations per second, laying the groundwork for the digital revolution. But this computer also consumed 150 kilowatts of electricity, enough to dim the lights in entire sections of Philly when it was switched on, and Percy Spencer patented the microwave oven, initially used in restaurants and ships before becoming a household staple decades later. Medicine also saw a breakthrough with the development of the first practical chemotherapy drugs for cancer treatment. Sidney Farber, a pathologist in Boston, used aminopterin to treat childhood leukemia, and television started to enter American homes, with networks like NBC and CBS expanding broadcasts, hinting at a cultural revolution to come. Hollywood classics like It's a Wonderful Life premiered, starring Jimmy Stewart and directed by Frank Capra. Though not an immediate box office hit, it would become one of the most beloved films of all time. The Academy Award for Best Picture went to The Best Years of Our Lives, a poignant story about veterans returning home and adjusting to civilian life. It swept the Oscars, winning 7 awards, including Best Director, and Best Actor. Across the Atlantic, France hosted the first Cannes Film Festival, signaling a cultural revival after years of war. In music, the big band era was fading, but Nat King Cole's I Love You for Sentimental Reasons topped the charts, marking the rise of smooth jazz and pop crossover. Country music also gained popularity with artists like Eddie Arnold. And in sports, the Basketball Association of America was founded in June 1946, which would later merge with the National Basketball League to become the NBA in 1949. Meanwhile, fashion made headlines when the bikini debuted in Paris, an audacious design introduced by Louis Réard and named after the Bikini Atoll, part of the Marshall Islands in the Pacific, which was a nuclear test site, where a series of 23 nuclear device detonations named Operation Crossroads were conducted by the US, beginning in July 1946. This linked fashion to the atomic age, shocked the world, and became a symbol of post-war liberation. But not all news was good. In December, the Weinkauf Hotel fire in Atlanta claimed 119 lives, the deadliest hotel fire in US history. And in Japan, a powerful earthquake triggered a tsunami that killed more than 1,300 people, a grim reminder of nature's fury. 1946 was a year of hope and uncertainty, a world rebuilding while standing at the threshold of the nuclear age and the Cold War. Remember, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.